Can we start? Is everybody ready? Okay, so, welcome ladies and gentlemen. The motion for today's debate is, this House would introduce a governmental basic income for all artists, rather than offering governmental fellowship and grant to a certain artist upon application. Representing the proposition, we have team from England, and on the opposition, we have team from Singapore. From the proposition side, our speakers are first speaker Alex, second speaker Maya, third speaker Jess, and the reply speaker Maya. On the opposition side, our speakers are first speaker Alina, second speaker Haltian, third speaker Daryl, and the reply speaker Haltian. Each speaker will have 8 minutes to deliver their speech. The first and the last minute of each speech is considered protected time, during which points of information, POIs, may not be offered. The judges will signal the end of protected time at the 1 minute mark, after which POIs can be offered, and will signal the return to protected time at the 7 minute mark. At the 8 minute mark, they will give a double clap or ding to signal the end of speech. Additionally, there will be 3 claps or dings at 8:15, and the judges will stop listening at 8:30. Best of luck to both teams, and I'll hand over the floor to our chair judge.
Welcome both team in round 6 of WSDC 2024. Let's just do a quick panel introduction before we directly start the debate. My name is Hans, I'll be your chair, pronounced with data, and feel free to ensure the panel is selected members of the house judges as per usual. Now I'll let my panel introduce themselves, starting from the left side.
Hello, I'm Kume. Good luck to you all.
Hi, my name is Inga. I'm from Rams.
Card from Australia, hey, like, good luck for the round.
Awesome. As per usual, there will be timer 1 minute 7 and 8 with this battle. QI highly encouraged for high engagement as well as the QI just looks more as per usual. If you have anything to say, feel free to say it before you start your independent speeches. If not, you can directly start. Under that motion, let's just open the debate. Hong Kong corruption for speaker. Here we go.
A painting of sunflower seeds may mean nothing to most people, but as a person from Hong Kong, it is a symbol of resistance. Government basic income is the best way to get more art and more diverse art, and we are very proud to propose 3 things in my speech. Firstly, our stance. Secondly, on access to the art industry. Thirdly, on why we get a more diverse range of art. Firstly, our stance. 1. What do we think a basic income looks like? A. We think the amount you get as a basic income probably varies from country to country. B. The basic income will importantly help you survive and meet your basic needs, but most artists probably want more if they can attain that. C. What do you need to qualify as an artist? Look, we think there are many ways for you to verify whether someone is an artist. For example, income tax forms, or for example, employment forms. Those are the things that will be verified by the government. You probably need some proof of accreditation. So for example, if you're a member of art associations or unions like SAFRICA in America or BFI in the UK, we think there are a range of ways to prove that you engage with art professionally rather than simply scribble on a piece of paper. D. Private funding still exists on both sides. Therefore, people can still compete for funding and have incentive to provide good art, but crucially, some artists can choose not to be constrained by mainstream narratives if they can meet survival as their basic needs. Secondly, what does opposition need to defend? 1. They need to tell us whether there are many small grants or a few big grants. Secondly, they need to explain to us what the criteria that is used by the average fellowship or grant, because we think that merit is incredibly subjective in most cases. But thirdly, they have to defend starving artists whose art is immediately popular. They have to defend all those things that prevent the development of the art industry. First argument then. Why does the government basic income drastically increase access to the art industry? A. Why do we get more artists on our side of the house? 2 reasons. 1. We think that creating art becomes more economically viable on our side of the house. In the status quo, a lot of people go to art school on either side of the house. But the unfortunate reality is that a lot of them simply choose to, for example, follow a corporate path because that is seen as a more traditional path for people to earn more money. The difference on our side of the house is that with government income, you are able to at least guarantee survival. So, a lot of people are able to, for example, follow their passion because they don't need to, for example, fear about starving or fear about worrying themselves or their families because they are unable to get any form of basic protection on their side of the house. Secondly, we shift the narrative around the art industry. The problem of fellowship and grants is that there's a massive risk on their side of the house, and return only comes in the long term. For example, when you're able to build up your reputation to win competitions, or when you're able to meet, for example, the barriers to entry of competitions on your side of the house. This is why there are massive narratives that deter people from entering the art industry. This looks like artist careers being, for example, unstable or volatile. For example, people only get paid paycheck to paycheck, which means that you get strong opposition from your family and friends, and they encourage you to enter more traditional careers on your side of the house. But crucially, even if there isn't opposition from other people, you scare yourself because of the massive uncertainty on your side of the house, because you don't even get any form of protection on your side. Sure, you might get the basic unemployment benefits on either side, but we think the protection on your side is probably far worse on your side of the house. What is the difference? We think that basic income for artists is able to sufficiently counter those narratives. Because let's be reasonable. Some people will probably still choose to be a doctor, but we think stability probably means that far more people are now going to be willing to choose to become an artist on our side of the house because they fulfill their basic needs. We think this is important. Secondly, why is this argument really important then? I think there are 3 different reasons. Firstly, we think that we're able to increase the quantity of artists, which increases the quantity of art. And the reason why this wins as a debate alone is because the quality of art is incredibly subjective if that's what opposition wants to tell you about. But what you can be certain about is that if there's a massive quantity of art, it is far more likely for the average public to actually find some art that actually meets their tastes and preferences, that actually finds arts they actually like. So opposition, if you want to talk about quality, needs to explain to you what quality of art actually looks like, but you can believe that quantity of art is something that is guaranteed on our side of us and that's able to meet the tastes and preferences of more people on our side. But secondly, let's talk about the quality of art. Is that something they want to talk about? Because look, what is unique about art is that they may not be seen as immediately good once they are published. For example, Emily Dickinson's correspondence isn't meaningful when they're just letters before, when someone survives. It only becomes meaningful posthumously or after that person actually passed away. Therefore, more artists entering the art industry allows more possibilities for people to realize good art in the future, and therefore we think that while good art is subjective, we think the possibility of you finding good art is far higher on our side. Thirdly, we think there's a principal element to this argument. The reason for this is because governments have a responsibility to address market failure. What does this mean? We think that artworks are oftentimes underprovided by absent government support. We think it's similar to things like compulsory education. The reason why artwork creates massive social good is because, for example, oftentimes these are things that people generally like and do not create negative externalities. These are oftentimes, for example, a form of expression that allows individuals to chase their passion and also convey messages that are actually good for public. We think that's massive social good, and therefore governments also have a principal duty to actually provide art. Before I move on, go.
Governments have a duty to general societal good. If one artist's art is deemed to be not good or not receptive, why should governments still fund it?
One, because what is good is really subjective and varies from people to people. But secondly, for example, governments still fund sport, even if you might not like sport. We think governments don't fund things only because they benefit every single individual. As long as it benefits a certain amount of people, we think governments have a duty to fund those things because they're responsible to different people in different ways. Second argument, why do you get a more diverse range of art on our side of the house? There are 2 observations under this argument. Firstly, we think artists get far fewer restrictions on our side of the house. What does this look like? Under fellowship and grants, it probably means that artists are forced to follow really tight deadlines and they cannot deviate from the expected style, because the average competition probably has a very strict regulations or very strict styles of what it means to be good, because the judges who get in, for example, those competitions are people who determine who actually deserves the grants. Oftentimes people from a very specific background on their side of the house. They oftentimes look like people who are more privileged and can garner a certain degree of reputation, and therefore they are more conservative, and there's a very specific or narrow conception of what good art actually is on their side. Why does this change with basic income? This is a far more organic process on our side of the house. This means that you have more time to explore or experiment with different forms of art. You have more liberty to try new styles of art, because if you don't starve to death, you simply have the right to try more styles of art, whereas on their side of the house, they are forced to confine to societal expectations. What do these new styles look like? This may look like, for example, the shading or the emotions you convey in paintings. This may look like the plot you use in movies that actually convey different types of narratives. We think that you get far more diversity, which caters to more people's needs on our side. The second observation then is why you simply get more types of art on our side of the house. We think that there's certain forms of art that barely survives on their side of the house. A, we think it looks like things like protest art. For example, UK singer Stormzy criticizes the UK government for the treatment of black communities or the working class. These arts will never be on a large scale on their side of the house because fellowships or grants will not be given by the governments to someone who is seen as challenging the government. But for example, if you look at things like sunflower seeds, we think that you are far more able to do this on our side of the house when governments are forced to give artists basic income on our side of the house, which means that you're able to get, for example, far more collectivity between social movements. We think that's important. But B, we think it also looks like things like provocative art or abstract art. For example, Rhythm Zero was a piece of performative art by the artist using her body as a canvas. They allowed people to put things on her, and she realized that people, for example, put pins on her. This shows that how authority corrupts people. But because governments generally appeal to the public and have a very narrow conception, because it's only like one government that determines what is good or not, we think that provocative art or abstract art simply don't survive on their side of the house. But finally, we think art produced by minorities are probably going to survive, but to a much larger extent on our side of the house. They don't get private funding on their side because there isn't public appeal. They don't get government fellowship because they want things that appeal to the general public. Crucially, this is important because art is a uniquely powerful means for the artist to convey their message and connect with the audience. Their messages and narratives that can only be spread through arts. For example, sunflower seeds spreading resistance that cannot be done explicitly on their side of the house because of how China works. Very proud to propose.
Excuse me, would it be cool to spectate if both teams are okay with the force?
Sorry?
Would it be okay to spectate if both teams are okay with the force?
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you first off. Speaker for advantage to continue the debate. Welcome to from opposition, option for speakers for review.
On opposition, we don't defend the starving artists that they assert we defend. They do, because the poorest artists on their side of the house only can live off this basic minimum income that apparently on their side is only enough for basic survival. So I asked them, how are they going to get the materials required to make art? How are they going to contact all those people, publishers for example, who push their art out to the public? As long as their case still remains unmechanized, they cannot claim any of the benefit they purport they can. Our setup, we will offer governmental fellowships and grants to certain artists upon application rather than governmental basic income for all artists. 1. What do government fellowships and grants look like? They are based on a range of criteria. On one hand, this is decided based on need. If artists are unable to sustain their art processes on their own, governments can step in to provide them with capital. On the other hand, this could also be based on merit and the quality of potential art produced. Governments can evaluate this using various independent art bodies and ombudsmen to decide the quality of art based on criteria such as 1. The technical skill and precision of the artist, 2. The level of social messaging it sends and its impact, and 3. Audience reception. We don't think this is a very radical policy. Many criteria are subjective, like in debates, but we still use objective criteria to evaluate it. Furthermore, we think most people are able to intuitively decipher whether a piece of art is good, and we can aggregate these opinions to extract out a criteria. I want to note, governments are likely to still invest in art that shows high potential, but not merit in the present. This can be seen based on factors like the social messaging that artists intend to forward, or the thinking process artists go through while producing this art. These grants will be given to a significant number of people on our side, using immense political capital used by proposition to provide this basic income to like every single artist in the country. After obtaining this grant, the conditions applied to artists are unlikely to be overly harsh, as they assert, because governments are not profit-maximizing entities and thus do not demand immense returns from artists. Governments will also want conditions or grants to be favorable for artists to entice people to apply for the scholarship. So their assertion of overly restrictive timelines is out of this debate for the structural reason I gave you. Intuitively, the quantum and sum given to each artist is larger than the basic income by virtue of the grant being given to fewer artists. The application process on our side will likely be highly publicized and accessible to all, with low barrier of entry to entice the most number of applicants. Lastly then, fellowship grants is not just a lump sum of money. It often connects artists to art institutions or educational opportunities to enhance their skill sets over time. Second, private funding exists on both sides of the house, which means other governments may not want to fund can still be accounted for through private grants and fellowships. So the sunflower art that they want to talk about will still exist on our side, but our external governments have an incentive to publish that too. Thirdly, finally, proposition has a majority burden to prove the basic income is beneficial in a majority of instances. Case division. First, on more accessibility. Second, on expanding the impact of art. And third, on better talent cultivation. Before that, rebuttals. Their first argument on increasing access. One assertion under this: becoming an artist will become more economically viable. One, they don't mechanize this. They said only a best survival is guaranteed. How are artists going to produce art on their side? Second, it is uncomparative, because on our side, our value of grants are far larger, given that it's given to fewer people. So the price of being able to produce good art is also incredibly, significantly much more enticing. Secondly, they say, well, increasing the quantity is more important than quality. First, we think on their side of the house, they don't prove how these forms of art will be pushed out and to the public enough. So they could say, hypothetically, if there's a lot of art circulating, the people could find tastes and preferences. They don't prove how art gets from the table to the public, so they don't get their claim. But finally, even if quality is subjective, we think we have a panel to choose from. It's not just one guy saying, I like the sunflowers and I want to publish it. We have a panel representing all sectors of society, which is structurally likely because governments want to be inclusive. So it's on our side of the house that maybe it's subjective, but it is fair. The second argument then is also out of this debate because we do have reasonable restrictions, and secondly, we also think governments have an incentive to be innovative so they won't just not pick new forms of art. For those reasons, both their arguments are then out. First argument on increasing the accessibility of art. Let's make clear the difference separating both sides. On our side, individuals who are poor or individuals who have merit will be given these grants. Those ends of the spectrums are covered. This debate then is about whether individuals who have neither merit nor need should be given a meager sum of money by the government in hopes of making them contribute to society through the production of art. We say providing them with a government basic income incurs a huge art cost. One, definitionally, they don't need the money because they're not poor. But secondly, these individuals who are privileged in the art industry actually constitute the majority of artists. This is because the barriers of entry to becoming an artist before you can even be awarded this grant or income are incredibly high. Art schools are rare, school fees are exorbitant because they're so niche, and there's no political pressure to subsidize these school fees. Therefore, a huge part of this basic income is given to people, hold on, who don't actually need it. Yes?
Your side funds artists who already have projects and prospects, but what do you do with those with experimental projects that governments won't fund or are between projects?
That's it. I've just proven to you that governments have an incentive to fund experimental projects because they're new, they make art interesting to people. So if they want to promote art, that is the art that they will fund. This is problematic because that means that few minorities who actually manage to get their foot into the art industry through, for instance, rare scholarships are deprived of the ability to make impactful art. One, because you need resources to make art. Materials are incredibly expensive. We're not just talking about expensive acrylic paint. We're talking about cameras, high-tech technology that can allow you to make films, for example, editors to look through the 7 drafts that you have just made for your new book. But secondly, you also need different sources of inspiration to create good art. Imagination originates from reality. The more facets of reality you're exposed to, the better imagination and more provocating it is. On our side, large sums of money are awarded to people who actually access it, which means they also get access to institutions they previously are unable to access on the side of proposition. But secondly, we think governments have a strong incentive to make sure these grants given to minority artists are effective in helping them empower themselves. One, because it improves their reputation. They are seen as an inclusive government who are able to contend with opposition views, who are able to represent minority cultures. That is how on our side, these minority arts are pushed out to the forefront with more money, and that is how we increase visibility. The impact then is that uniquely on our side of the house, we empower minority artists, we empower minority art. Second argument then, on expanding the impactful role of art in society. One, we're able to do this because promoting art is incredibly difficult on their side of the house when they already have this safety net. So if it's true that they managed to prove this income will be sufficient, we think that on their side of the house, artists are less motivated to actually promote the art that they create, because you have to go to so many galleries to get someone to accept your art. You have to go to harsh criticism every time you get someone to vet it. That means that on their side of the house, every time they meet some form of roadblock, for example, a very common artist block, they're less likely to take an effort to overcome that. It's uniquely on the outside of the house then that with government grants to incentivize them, they have to do it, they have to push themselves to produce art for the good of society. Here's the way. Even if we have a lower quantity of art, we think a higher quality of art is more important. If art is good and it incentivizes more people to participate, that uniquely happens on our side of the house because high quality art changes people's perception of art. I don't remember all the paintings I've seen on Google when I Googled sunflower, but I remember La Pieta. I remember all the important works of art that have been very high quality because they made the most lasting impression on me. And that is why I cultivate my respect for art. That is what's going to happen outside the house when good quality art is pushed out to people. That is how we promote art outside. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you, first option speaker, for your speech. Now I invite the second option speaker to start their speech. Here you go.
Pieces like Marina Abramovich's Rhythm Zero or Jestovall's collection of embroidered flowers in the shape of the vagina have brought massive publicity to the plight of women around the world. We think these pieces are socially valuable. We think we get far more of them. We get far more people from diverse backgrounds into the art world on our side of the house. We're very proud to propose. I'm going to ask a couple of questions in this debate. First, in which world are more people able to go into art? Second, in which world do we get more diverse, better quality art? Finally, a new argument on how we make artwork more accessible under our side. But before that, one piece of extraneous rebuttal to the argument they spent 1 minute on at the end of their first speech, when they say people are more incentivized to deal with setbacks and produce art in their world because you have to be able to justify that you are an artist, you have to be justifying that you are producing good art in order to go and get these grants. Panel, this simply fails to engage with what Alex literally told you from first, when he explained to you that you are going to have to provide some form of accreditation to show that you're an artist. So in the same way that we say that membership of something like the BFI or SAG-AFTRA is not based purely on merit, no thank you, but we say that it's based on simply being able to prove that you are an artist employed in some professional capacity, that you are producing art for a living full time, even if it's not the highest quality art, even if you are not deemed, according to their very narrow conception of what is good art, to have produced the best art to be worthy of this on merit. We still say you are able to prove that you are an artist in our world, and that is the criteria we establish for accessing this. So on either side of the house, no thank you. To access this kind of funding, whichever form that funding takes, you have to prove that you are an artist. You have to deal with the setbacks. You have to deal with the feedback you get from museums and galleries. That argument is out of the debate. Having established that then, we tell you that far more people go into art in our world. No, thank you. And Alex gave you 3 reasons for this. He said first, there is currently a narrative of instability around the art world, and that is the main thing that pushes people out of the world of art. It is not the fact, no thank you, that you might not be paid a large amount for a specific piece of art. Rather, it is the narrative that if you are not constantly selling art at all times, you are going to be fitting into the starving artist stereotype. It is that causes parents from lower income backgrounds to say, I know that art is your passion and your vocation, but I just don't think it's a good idea. No, thank you. He also told you you're more likely to drop out of art in their world to look for something like a corporate job later down the line when you grow tired of leading this life of instability and financial instability. And finally, he said you're more likely to look for a better paid job. How do they engage? Well, they give 3 responses, and this is kind of like the closest they really get to a positive push on this clash. So let's just take them down. No, thank you. First, they said you didn't mechanize this argument. Well, Alex gave you 3 mechanisms, so that's out of the debate. Second, they said you are more likely to be enticed into art on their side of the house because you are offered bigger prizes. Look, this might be true, but this is only true for the very small group of people who probably go into art on either side of the house because they are very passionate about it. But this group of people who go into art in their world are always going to be the more privileged, no thank you, because they can be enticed by the potential of a big prize. They can be enticed by the potential of this prestigious fellowship or grant. What they don't have to worry about is when they are between projects, when they do not have wealthy parents to fund them, when they do not have people backing them up, paying for the rent on their apartment, paying for them to have food to eat at the end of of the day. It is in the name of that group of people who we think are more likely to produce, no thank you, diverse and innovative art that we stand behind, that we see the most important thing in this debate is getting them into the art world. Finally, and this was like a little odd, like I will admit, the proposition bench laughed a little at this. They said, people can't afford to make art in our world because they're only getting a basic income and therefore you don't have enough money for paint. Like, panel, first of all, you're still able to sell your art. Like, we're not stopping artists from selling their art. So if you want to sell a piece of art and get a fancy new camera, you can still do that on either side of the house. But second, it's just really unclear how they think people get into the art world, no thank you, in their world. Like, I think people can start making art, can get a foothold in the art world without having these most expensive artworks. I think then from there, the UBI will be perfectly sufficient. Why does this argument matter so much in the debate? Alex gave you 3 reasons why it's only in our world that we are able to get this best accessibility of art. Not only is it right on principle that we think people from all backgrounds should be able to go into art, we said it's important that we have massive quantity of art, because art is subjective. This is the only way multiple people will find what they actually like, because you can't assess objectively in the present day what the most popular art will be in future, because this is the only way to address the market failure of the under-provision of art, which we think is a social good. No, thank you. Second question is on diverse art. We said that you are far more likely to have so many restrictions placed on the type of art you can create in their world, because you need to meet certain expectations, because you're judged by people who are narrow-minded, because you're vulnerable to deadlines and pressure, because you're pigeonholed into meeting a certain conception of what your own style is in order to get more and more. So you're more likely to be conservative, to produce less interesting, innovative art. How do they engage? Well, they said first, you can establish objective guidelines. No, thank you. And what I think is quite funny here is that they give the example of debating. So they say it's quite subjective, but you're able to establish objective guidelines about what is good and what is bad. Panel, I think if anyone can say that, like, the debating meta shifts over the course of several years, it is Team England. Like, a while ago an EPL accent was enough to win you the debate. Now, unfortunately, for side proposition, it's not. But, I think it's very clear that you cannot tell in future what will be considered good debating. So whereas in the past, accent prejudice, or the fact that I'm a woman, no thank you, might have deemed me unable to be persuasive, we think in future you are far more able to assess different types of art, we're able to assess what is likely to be better in future. Then they say, well, governments have an incentive to fund diverse art because they want to attract more people. No, this is literally a reason for what Alex told you. They are going to attract the tyranny of the majority, because you want to get not the largest amount of people, no thank you, but you want to allocate the funding in a way that is going to get each individual piece of art the most funding that you can possibly get. That means that each individual piece of art is deemed to be as utile as possible. So it's in their world, actually, you fall vulnerable to this tyranny of the majority. You do not fund diverse art. You do not get the kinds of protest art, provocative art, innovative art that Alex tells you is so important. Before I go on to my argument, I'll take that here why.
A corporate job is still likely to pay more and be more stable. Why is our livable income the tipping point for these artists?
Because you're literally being told you're going to have a stable source of income. Like, you are literally being told you can pursue your vocation, which you'd probably rather do than a corporate job, but now you're not going to need to worry about being literally without income at certain points in your life. I think it's very clear that it is this narrative of instability, it is this fear of being literally without money at certain points that does put people off. Why do we increase ability to see art in our world, increase accessibility of art? 4 reasons. First, because we just get more art. It just becomes much cheaper to buy. You're more likely to be able to get accessibility, no thank you, to museums more cheaply when you have more art when it's being sold more cheaply. Second, because artists are better paid, they don't have to inflate their prices artificially. They don't have to buy into the perception that art is a luxury, that only the very wealthy should be able to buy a painting or a sculpture to display privately in their homes. You can sell a painting rather than it being perceived as a luxury. Third, artists have far more control in our world. So you can decide for the benefit of social good, for people you care about, for people to whom you think your art might be really impactful or important, you can decide that you want to donate it. You can decide you want to sell it for a lower price to a museum that offers lower entrance fees. You can decide to find it the perfect home with someone you think will really appreciate it. But in their world, when it's tied to a certain government initiative or project, you are far less likely to be able to get that art displayed where multiple people will be able to see it. And fourth, we think in our world, you're far more able to work on a passion piece in your spare time that you can sell for a low price while also making more expensive pieces. You're not constantly caught up in their rat race of looking for your next project, looking for the thing that you can sell at a very high price, Rather, you're able to decide that actually you want to do something more innovative, more experimental, even if it does not reap the maximum possible reward. Why do we think this is so important, that more people can see art? We think it's really powerful to see something that opens your mind to new ways of thinking, see how Banksy's Love in the Bin was shredded as social commentary that private ownership of art is bad, or it reflects the experience of an oppressed group, where it literally just makes you feel interested and uplifted. We think this art is incredibly socially valuable. We're so proud to propose.
Right, thank you, second option speaker, for your time speech. First thank you for team option, second option speaker. The floor is yours. Here.
Our case was very simple, that equality is not exactly synonymous with equity. So if on their side they really wanted to uplift the most vulnerable in this debate, they had to accept that giving every single person a blanket same sum is not successful at targeting those who just needed more. So that is the comparative they had to deal with, but still haven't. Two clashes in this debate. First, on access to art. Second, on the quality or quantity of art. First, on access to art. And I first want to make a strategic observation, which is that their case compares against the alternative of no funding at all for poor artists. That is not the case. We put you on our model that we will be able to fund poor artists through, for instance, clear and objective income markers to income cutoffs of when you'll be able to fund those who need it more. That is included in the motion. Second of all then, even if they want to claim that in the current status quo, it is insufficient and many people fall through the gaps, we would argue we can use the same amount of political capital they consume on their side to improve these systems, to catch more people who need more money, like, for instance, increasing the income cutoff for grants and fellowships. Lastly, I just want to point out their comparative isn't necessarily perfect either, because they say they too would implicitly attach conditions, like, for instance, the need to be verified as an artist or to be attached to an art organization. In many cases, these same things require financial capital and connections. So the weighing is this. At the very least, on our side, we have more money to give to every single poor person awarded a fellowship or a grant. Because with the same pool of funding spread across fewer people, on weighing, therefore, we put you in our first argument, that on our side, the poor get more of what they need. So the strategy in this debate is this. They have not actually engaged on a unique difference between both sides, which is that on their side, they have to fund those who neither possess need nor merit and do not meet any of the cutoffs for any grants or fellowships. They therefore have to defend uniquely giving more money to those who do not need this money, are not poor, and have not actually demonstrated that they can produce good art. On weighing, therefore, we reduce the opportunity cost of giving money to these people. We have more money to spare for poor artists. I then want to deal with their mechanisms at face value and take them at their best. The first thing they say is that they make art more economically viable. This assumes that giving the same amount of money to everyone is sufficient, but it is different for the poor. $1,000 a month may be enough for someone from a middle-class background to survive on making art, but it is insufficient for someone who has to pay rent and cannot just live in their family home, for someone who, for instance, has to juggle multiple bills and multiple debts. So what we've proven, therefore, is this. On our side, we can first target those with more need. Second, give a greater amount of money per grant. And third, patch any gaps in the status quo with our model. On our side, therefore, we've proven to you there's an incentive of the government to give to the most vulnerable, because that improves their reputation and their general perception. They shift, therefore, to saying that they can shift the narrative around that. But if it is true that the return on investment on grants and fellowships is so uncertain, we think on our side, boards have an incentive to give out more of these grants and fellowships to cover this uncertainty, which changes the narratives, because when more grants are available to the general public, it is now viewed as a more viable career. But second of all, I want to flip this claim, Because grants and fellowships uniquely have a certain prestige attached to them precisely because they are competitive. That is why many Asian parents actually ask their children to go into what? To get these grants. On their side, when the entire artistic industry is viewed as a bunch of struggling artists who rely only on government welfare, their perception actually decreases and there's a worse narrative around that. That point falls to us. They retreat at the end of this crash, therefore, to pure mitigation. They say, artists can still sell their art to earn money. This obviously contradicts their own case on the need for a universal basic income to begin with. So I suspect they need to make up their mind. So at the end of this clash on the poor, the weighing is this. 1, we can target the poor better, and 2nd, we incur less of an opportunity cost of giving money to those who demonstrate neither need nor merit. Next, on the quality of art. Yes.
So in a debate where the info slide literally says that this UBI is enough to fund a basic standard of living, you chose to state this
Sure,
version in not
it is
being
enough to find a basic standard of living. But I want to ask you, is it actually enough to do the things that they say, to create adventurous art, to create a lot of art, and to create it very well? It is not. They need to prove that. This debate, therefore, was not actually about the sunflower or socially valuable pieces, because on either side, given that we can both recognize these pieces as socially valuable, clearly they already exist and already receive funding. This debate, therefore, was about other forms of art. Things like, for instance, NFTs or commercialized forms of art that just lose their meaning because they are so diluted. On weighing, therefore, it is just not true that quantity is greater than quality for a few reasons. 1, this doesn't fulfill their own metric of social utility because a mere quantity of art, in many cases, is not accessed by many people. 1,000 pieces, in many cases, would never all be seen. Second of all, there is an opportunity cost, as we proved to you in our first argument. Third of all, on their side, by increasing the quantity of art, they actually crop out good art because there's a saturation of the art market, which makes it more difficult for good pieces to stand out. The weight, therefore, is this. When they say future art has potential, we'll bite the bullet. Because on our side, we can pick people who already demonstrate merit and therefore have a higher certainty of return. Their second argument, therefore, was hinged on subjectivity. But we put to you, subjectivity can be corrected because there are many different selectors with many different tastes in art, so they can check for each other. Second of all, there is an incentive to accept more adventurous forms of art because those are the kinds that break through to the forefront. So this is out of this debate. Lastly, therefore, they shift to protest art. But that is not true for a few reasons. First of all, governments have an incentive to fund art that is critical of them to get ahead of the criticism. Second of all, there are opposition parties and non-partisan agencies who want to fund these arts as well. So those incentives are counteracted on our side. So for all of these reasons, their case does not stand. Third argument, therefore, on increasing talent cultivation. And here is where I want to take them at their best. Because this argument directly deals with their strongest push on the quantity and quality of art produced. And the premise of this argument is that it is uniquely on our side that we actually get the cultivation of talent from a young age. And the structural reason why is because on our side, artistic institutions have a greater incentive to cultivate talent within their own four walls. And the reason why is because grants and fellowships come with a certain prestige attached to them. As the info slide says, in many cases, they are extremely competitive. So many institutions want to invest huge amounts of money into their entire pool of students to get good students who are able to get those grants so they can later advertise it to get more people to join the institutions. Comparatively, on their side, they may say, but institutions still have an incentive to do talent cultivation so they can get successful artists in the future. The difference is this. Many grants are received immediately upon graduation. They can claim credit for those successes far faster. On their side, when those successes only happen 20 years down the road, it is very difficult to claim credit for them. And therefore, there is very little incentive to do intense kinds of talent cultivation that you uniquely see on our side. So what does that look like? It looks like, for instance, more investment in youth programs, in summer schools, more investment in allowing poor students to come into your school and do art for you. So for all of these reasons, this argument takes them at their highest. We get a greater quantity of art with more talent, higher quality of art, and we benefit the poorest who are now let into these institutions. So at the end of this debate, I just want to flag out, they have yet to deal with our argument, because all they say to our arguments are mitigation. But as we've proven to you, first of all, on weighing, quality is far more important than quantity. And second of all, if they want to talk about the poorest, equity is far more important than absolute equality. So for all of those reasons, we take this debate on both of their highest grounds. I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you, second option speaker, for your fine speech. To the Sunday from Round14, option third speaker for here.
In order for Singapore to win this debate, you need to believe two things. The first is that poor artists and the poorest artists are still going to be funded on their side of the house. There are a number of reasons why this isn't true. Firstly, as they say, the amount of money they're giving to artists is a huge amount of money. Governments aren't going to want to give this to the poorest artists because they're going to come under fire for ignoring those who actually have true merit. Because of the fact that governments are accountable to the people, and there's going to be huge amounts of criticism when people are saying, why are poor artists receiving more than poor sports people or poor people who are working in shops and are only on the minimum wage? At that point, governments are not likely to fund the very poorest artists on their side. Know that what they want to stand by is just social welfare. It doesn't exist in some countries. But even if that was the case, it was those who were just above the poverty line who completely missed out on any money at all on their side. At least they got a basic level on our side. But the second thing you need to believe is that art is very, very expensive to produce and that you can't get anywhere without a lot of money on their side. This often isn't the case. In order to produce some of the art that has had the biggest impact, such as Colombian protest songs that are literally made just using indigenous instruments, or paintings that are made using very inexpensive oil or using natural indigenous materials, you don't need a lot of money. What you need is you need a basic standard of living that encourages you to dedicate your life to art, to dedicate a huge amount of time to art. You don't need a huge fund, you just need security and stability. And that was something that the motion gave us and something that they couldn't contest. Three things to talk about in this speech. Firstly, on accessibility of art. Secondly, on to what extent is the artistic sphere an accessible one to other people. And lastly, on the quality of art. Firstly, on the access of art itself, because this was Maya's split that she brought you that received absolutely no response. What Maya tells you is that art is far more likely to be accessible. It's far more likely to be cheaper because artists are better paid, because artists have more control, and for that reason they don't feel the need to artificially hike up their prices. Absolutely no response. But I think this is debate winning for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's an independent avenue to getting more people wanting to go into the field in the first place, because when more people are aware of art, people are more inspired to actually take the leap of going into that field. But secondly, when art is valued, that means you have political pressure to up things like support. So even if you were to buy their strange claim that this isn't a sufficient amount of money to live in, we're more likely to get political pressure to up whatever this income is that we are giving on our side, and that's more likely to encourage people to go into the field in the first place. It's more likely to spread the value of art. It's more likely to make individuals have the opportunity to connect with the kind of art that really inspires them and that really makes them feel happy. Second thing to talk about then is accessibility of the field of art, because they essentially say, in response to what we tell you, is how they have to defend an incredibly difficult and competitive process with an application board that lots of people have to go through and compete with each other, that, well, you know, there's still objective criteria and people are still going to be able to get this funding. A couple of responses here. Firstly, the people on these boards do tend to have grown up in the same kind of artistic milieu. They tend to have the same kind of belief as to what kind of brushstrokes are best or what kind of melodies are best. And so it's likely to be the same people who are getting funding. Governments are quite risk averse. They're not going to want to invest in some sort of experiential art. But secondly, I think when you do have to compete with other artists, which is something that's exclusive to their side, exclusionary metrics tend to arise from that, because you have artists who are trying to one-up each other. You have people at the top who are saying that this kind of art is valuable and this kind of art really isn't valuable. And at that point, it's the people who do venture into experiential art, who do try and push the boundaries, who are less likely to get that funding in the first place. So there's a significant number of people who are locked out. But even if that wasn't the case, note that it's only the perception that it would be the case, which is quite a reasonable one for people who are considering whether they want to go into the artistic field in the first place to have. That means that they never take that step in the first place. They never get the opportunity to actually create their art. They never get the opportunity to fulfill their dreams or to make other people happy with the art that they create. The second thing they say is that these people don't need the money because they're not poor. Comparatively, artists are usually wealthy. And then they give us a whole bunch of material as to how deprived people can't make art because resources are expensive and because you need a lot of sources of inspiration. I have a number of responses to this. Firstly, because of the fact that grants are larger, there are necessarily fewer of them on their side. So I know, for example, if I want to go into art, there's a 2% chance that I'm going to get a grant on their side. To up my chance of getting that grant, I need to take out a huge amount of time that comes at a huge opportunity cost to actually develop my artistic skills. I need to find a market, I need to find people who want to buy my art, I need to find a niche that I can go into. And that's when I have to buy expensive resources. That's when I have to take a huge amount of time going and trying to gather lots and lots of sources of inspiration. For for most people, they just think, I'm never going to get to that standard. I'm never going to be one of that lucky 2%. These are people who've been told their whole life, just go and get a proper job instead of going into art. These are people whose self-confidence is already incredibly low. It doesn't take much to push them away from the artistic path in the first place. They ensure that these people never step the path that they want to. But secondly, we still have private funding on our side of the house. But private funding is better and it's far more accessible. Why is this the case? I think given that with a basic income, I can do things like, say, afford 30 more boxes of oil and 30 more canvases to paint. I can therefore produce more art, I can therefore put it out on the street, I can therefore set up a small shop and try and sell it in my local community. I'm then able to catch the eye of the university that's willing to give me a chance. And that's when I get the big payout from private organisations. So our policy is essentially the levelling up mechanism that allows people to compete on the grounds that Singapore wants them to. But the third thing to say is that what they do is they add an extra layer of difficulty to poorer people who want to access art. Because you now need to market your art, they still haven't given us an explanation as to what this competitive process is actually going to look like. But I presume it's something like pitching your art to a panel, of saying what you're going to produce. And at that point, you need to not only produce your art, but you also need to put huge amounts of resources into the advertising campaign for your art. This is just an extra layer of difficulty for those who are locked out and can't afford it. Lastly, when they say that this isn't going to be a sufficient level of income, it will be sufficient. That's given to us in the motion. The crucial thing to note is that artists often stop. So, for example, one piece of art is rejected and they never again go down that path. We ensure that they have the level of stability. We ensure that they're able to continue producing art. And this is really, really important because it engages on their claim of how quality of art is the most important thing. Because the highest piece of quality art isn't going to be the first piece of art that you produce. It's likely to be the 60th or 70th piece of art. That 60th or 70th piece is only produced on our side when people are empowered to continue down that path. This is really important because it means that we have more people from minority backgrounds and it means we have more art. Every single piece of art that comes out has a huge value for people, so we clearly win on that. Yes?
So sure, a UBI may itself be a sufficient sum, but when you give the exact same amount to everyone, doesn't that give the rich an advantage?
It doesn't give the rich an advantage for the mechanism that I've explained as to how poor people are more likely to get exposure when they have that basic level of income, when they're likely to be empowered to go into art in the first place. On the diversity of art. So in response to our material, they essentially say that there isn't going to be harsh criteria, there aren't going to be time limits because governments aren't profit maximising. A couple of responses. Firstly, if this is such a huge amount of money, the government is likely to set a deadline to create hype that this is the statue will be built. There's a huge amount of pressure on artists, they feel pressured. But secondly, even if this isn't the case, artists are very afraid. If they don't produce their art quickly enough, if it's not good enough, they're never going to get this grant again. And because the alternative is starving or having to give up the job they love, that's when they settle for doing something that is the norm of the cultural norm. The strategic implication of this is that it assumes that their best case, that the people on this mystery board all do want to fund experiential art. Artists just aren't going to go into it. But on the idea that governments have an incentive to fund this kind of art, firstly, it isn't true because of the fact that governments are so risk averse and because this is so much money. But secondly, even if this is the case, it's the people who can pitch their experiential art as its best. And this isn't necessarily the way in which the best art is produced because you don't necessarily have an idea, then pitch it and then make it. Often art is made far more organically. Response then to their last argument on how art institutions cultivate talent within their walls. Firstly, this wasn't about private artist institutions. These existed on either side. This was specifically about government funding. That's out of the debate. But secondly, that's just another reason why you're likely to get the dominant form of art, because private institutions cultivate the same sorts of skills. It's only on our side that we get people actually able to express themselves, pursue their passions, and spread art to all. Very proud to propose.
Thank you, third proper speaker, for your final speech. To give the last standing debate, third proper speaker, floor is yours. Here.
Just like how Team England says art is subjective, what is considered a basic livable wage is also subjective. So it doesn't matter if they have a sufficient amount even for the poorest individuals. Our case was very simple. There's some individuals just needed more money than others. There's some individuals did not need funding. They needed connections to museums. They needed grants that gave them the ability to publish their art. So our case won on flexibility because a rich individual probably needed more connections than they needed funding. The poor individual probably needed more funding. The problem is that when you have a one-size-fits-all model for every single individual, people fall through the crack. It's the vulnerable individuals that lose out on their side. 2 questions. First, on the quantity of art. Second, on the diversity of art. First, on the quantity of art pieces and whether more individuals actually enter the art industry. Their first claim is that grants are exclusive and therefore people will constantly generate more art pieces, but however, this only happens on our side of the house when people are pushed to generate more quantity of art pieces simply because it's a grant and a fellowship that pressures them to do so. They say that on their side of the house, you need to wait many times, for instance, because people only get good art on their 50th or 60th art piece. No thank you. We think this may be true, but as we outline in our setup, artists and governmental organizations are still able to see the potential for individuals to get good art. So sure, they can look at things, for instance, your university portfolio, whether there's been an increasing trend of your art being more provocational and being better in terms of quality. So what their side doesn't recognize then is that there's a spectrum of artists, those in need and those in merit. As per the info slide, we can cater to both groups. What their side needed to cater to was to both not in need and both that don't have merit. I'll prove then why this is bad for their case. First, they say that rich individuals get mad on our side of the house when you give grants. However, I want to flip this claim. I think a universal basic income causes more backlash on their side because rich individuals are likely to be the taxpayers that pay more significant amount of money. Therefore, if you give money to individuals who have not as high quality of art, that's when the backlash is likely to be worse. But second, poor individuals who produce good art will be funded. No, thank you. And this also benefits rich individuals and changes the perception of art because it's seen as something that everyone of different social classes can also produce. First, let's talk about the artists that are poor but don't really have potential. Their only mechanism remaining in this debate is that there's a narrative that changes on their side of the house of self-indoctrinated fear. I just want to note, if you have been getting C's, no thank you, in art school every single year, I think a parent will still tell you to take that corporate job because on their side, you can get a basic livable income. But if your art pieces don't sell, if your art pieces don't get accepted to a gallery, a corporate job is probably more stable and there's probably better career progression. So it is true they have consistent income, it is consistently low by the virtue of the fact that it's spread across many individuals. They say you don't need huge amounts of funding because of an indigenous painting. Note their language. Their case in third shrinks to indigenous oil that honestly just doesn't meet the majority burden. No, thank you. The problem then is that artists on their side of the house still need to compete with rich individuals who, regardless of whether they have the basic livable income, still can have access to things like high quality paintbrushes, like high quality editors, and that can actually benefit the art pieces to make them even more higher quality. So the indigenous oil brushes, while native, still lose out on their side of the house. But on the note then, their policy of accreditation is euphemism for having art, for going to art school. No, thank you. So people on their side probably seem to get degrees, or at least be interested and cultivated within the art sphere, and this should be prohibitively expensive for most of the poor individuals on the ground. Therefore, this debate was more about the rich individuals who did not have the merit to qualify for grants and scholarships. Why then was it bad? We told you it was bad because it came at a significant opportunity cost, because you're giving individuals money when they simply do not need it, no thank you, and they do not produce socially utile outcomes. Therefore, on our side, we can better cater for the vulnerable. What do they say in response? Their argument is about the access to art. Their argument is purely about the increase of the quantity of art. One, the quantity of art is not the limiting factor, because on either side, and I think if their side just looked at social media, no thank you, there are plenty of art pieces in this world, on social media, in real life, on murals, etc. Therefore, it's more about the advertising and the spreading of art. So they have no direct response to our second argument, which tells you there's a higher inertia for artists on their side to publish their art when they already have the basic livable income. What does this mean for their case? No thank you. This means, one, they need to account for the individuals who simply do not have merit. They may produce more art pieces, but this is bad on weighing. Because one, the way you treat the perception of the art industry as not being useless is to create provocational, emotional, and impactful art. If you have a lot of art, but all of the art is bad, people still think the art industry, no thank you, is not worth going for. So it's only have quality of art that can lead to more people being interested in the art industry, thereby increasing the quantity of art. That was a unique weighing mechanism to prove that quality mattered more. Second question then, whether artists are likely to create diverse or stagnant art. Before I go on, sure.
The problem doesn't lie with governments giving everyone money. It lies with your side when governments get to pick and choose who to fund. You can't just say whoever you want to fund will also be funded on your side, of course, because the reality is governments often overlook and censor certain types of art, like provocative or protest art.
I'll get to protest art later, but check your envelopes. The motion and inflow side says they can also cater to those in need. So those in need with high potential also get catered to on our side. I'll flag you when I respond to anti-governmental art. The premise of their case then is that right now, that the art industry is incredibly rigid and will be controlled by governments. First sub-question, is art rigid and do they get more time and liberty, as our first speaker says? Despite their litany of examples, Team England actually misunderstands the art scene in the status quo. We think the art scene is more likely to be dynamic and fluid because the governments and society right now recognizes that art can be abstract, can be emotional, and can also be technical at the same time. That's why, for instance, we have a variety of artworks from art pieces like Helena, which show a fish being put in a blender, to more classical art paintings that show technical brushstrokes. The structural reason why governments are likely to fund this on our side is because governments right now prioritize creativity when there's a saturation in the market. Promoting different forms of art, therefore, allows individuals to be more creative. There's good, positive spin-off effects for the rest of society when they see provocational pieces of art, no thank you, and unconventional art. But second, the metric of art on our side is aggregated not by the elite, but the public as well. This is because we can use mechanisms like push and pull funding to see how much audience receptiveness there is on our side of the house before giving the grants and the fellowships. Notably, this takes on the principal push, because even if it's true that some art paintings will be posthumously good, we don't think governments should cater to individuals who do not exist right now, but individuals who exist 50 years in the future. This is because governments have a moral obligation to individuals who are living right now. So if these people within society think that artwork is bad, I don't think governments should use taxpayer money to fund these forms of art. So audience receptiveness is a unique weighing mechanism that's important for our side. Comparatively, on their side of the house, artists are less likely to publicize their own artworks, which is something we don't respond to. This is because their rebuttal doesn't hit our analysis. That, for instance, artists on their side still need to call museums in the middle of the night. No, thank you, still need to take criticism from museum galleries and directors. The problem then is that they have higher inertia on their side to publicize art. Their side, therefore, can allow artists to create art, get their basic livable income, but not publish art to the rest of society. On our side, there's a profit incentive to do so because that's how you're able to get money, that's how you sell your art. This is important because if their case was about the quantity of art that can be accessed by the rest of society, this can only happen when artists publish their art. Therefore, this was an independent path to victory because we told you, even though there's less art right now, more art gets published to the rest of society, more people see this art, and therefore we accrue their benefits on their side of the house. The way here is this. Even if governments are rigid, we still win. One, private groups or organizations can fill in the gap. So even if it's true that there are protest art or anti-governmental arts, private organizations have the incentive to fund these kind of arts because they want to be viral and because they want to have art that's sensational. Second, they don't respond really to our second speaker argument that you get more talent cultivation. And this is important because they told you that private institutions have incentive to train more artists only on our side of the house when they can claim the awards of the grants and the fellowships. Therefore, if they want to talk about the quality and the quantity of art, we get more and better artists on our side of the house that can reach the rest of society. So at the end of this debate, the strategy of the opposition was very clear. We win on flexibility because not everyone needs the same needs. Not everyone can fit the same cookie-cutter solution that Team England proposes. It is for this reason we are very proud to oppose.
Thank you all. Since our speaker for your fine speech, now to summarize the debate, option reply. You're here.
We had one very simple push, that the equality and opportunity does not always result in equity when practiced in real life. It is their lack of response to that one simple push that loses them this debate. So two votes emerge at the end of this debate. One, the proposition's vote that was ignorant and exclusionary, and our vote that was equitable and empowering. First, on their vote, and their vote was unstrategic at the top, because when the prop spends 8 minutes talking about whether the UBI is sufficient to create art, that was never our contention. Our contention was that giving the same amount of money to every single person is inequitable because the poor need more money to outcompete the already privileged who have connections, who have an art school background, who have no other financial burdens. So sure, a UBI may be sufficient, but it is basic and it is not enough to uplift the most vulnerable. So on weighing on our side, we would have preferred to target those who need more of the money. This is a response that we gave to you in first speaker, never responded to down the line. Because on our side, we decrease the opportunity cost of awarding this funding. Because money is not wasted on those who have demonstrated neither need nor merit. That is the spectrum that they had to defend in this debate. They have yet to give a justification for that specific actor. They shift, therefore, to talking about increasing access to art in general, but we flip this to you because we explain we increase access when the poor got more money relative to the rich, so they didn't see themselves as losing on the starting line and weren't deterred from entering the art industry. And second, we uniquely improve societal narratives around art because grants and fellowship come with a certain prestige attached to them that the universal basic income does not have. So if this is about Asian parents, which assure me I'm familiar with the kind of person, I would assure you that actually those kinds of parents do not want to send their children into an industry that is viewed as welfare-leisured, that is viewed as never having any sort of prestige. They shift, therefore, to the quantity of art. Unfortunately, we already took them at best and weighed this to you. That one, this is extremely marginal because most people will never see all the art in the world within their lifetimes. So they had no positive impact. All that happened was that they lost money on this. But second of all, we bit the bullet to you on future art because that was just uncomparative. On our side, we had a higher certainty of getting good art when we could invest in art that has already demonstrated its potential because we chose for merit and not any vague other outcomes. So when we retreated, therefore, to subjectivity, unfortunately, that was already preempted in our model because we explained many different selectors have varying tastes. For instance, different selectors might come from different schools of art. These different subjective tastes check against each other. And second of all, there is an incentive to promote innovation. Our work, therefore, was far more equitable because we gave to you a spectrum that down the line they have not engaged with. For those who needed art funding the most, we gave it to them. For those who demonstrated the most merit, we awarded them with fellowships and grants that gave them things beyond just money, gave them connections, gave them the equipment they needed to succeed. And we explained there is, unlike what they claim, a government incentive to give this money to the poor. Because as they say, the government fills gaps in the private market, and this is where those gaps are. And second, they want to improve their regulation. They retreated, therefore, to talking about protest art. Unfortunately, we already preempted this for you because we explained in first that governments have an incentive to fund these kinds of art to get ahead of criticism. For instance, the Missouri government funding BLM art within their districts. And second of all, as they say, there's private funding that severely negates the impact of this on their side. So at the end of this debate, they have yet to give you a response to all three of our arguments. First, that we increase access, taking them at their best. Second, that we expand the quality of art. And third, that we boost quality from the bottom up. So for all of those reasons, we explained at the end of this debate, we owe a duty to society as a whole. And it is because we uniquely fulfill that duty that I am very proud to oppose.
Thank you all. So one very fine speech to B plus speech in the debate, corruption, five questions. Here you go.
Two questions to ask when adjudicating this debate. On which side do we get more art and on which side do we get better quality art? But first panel, I'm going to take you on a little trip through the graveyard of arguments that Team Singapore has abandoned throughout this debate. First, the argument they tried to bring us at the end of their first speech on how you have more incentive to create art in their world. We told you that this is true on our side as well, because on either side you have to prove that you are an artist to access any kind of funding. They dropped this in second, attempted to resurrect it in third. I don't think it's coming back from the dead, given that they literally just reasserted it. Second, on their claim that artistic institutions now nurture young talent, but Jess responded to this in third, when she told you that this is a claim about private institutions which give funding equally on either side of the house. So that was also out of the debate. And third and finally, my argument, which they claimed was contingent on more art, conveniently ignoring the three other mechanisms we brought you on how we get more access to art. Given then that they pretty much dropped by the end of this debate almost all of their positive claims, and given that they completely ignored my split, which Jess weighed for you as an independent path to victory, because we need more access to art to inspire more young people to go into art so that we get better quality, more accessible art overall, they clearly lose this debate. But even so, on which side do more people go into art? We said that people from lower income backgrounds are more likely to go into art in our world. And we gave you very specific, very nuanced analysis here. Because when you perceive art as an industry that gives funding only to a select few, and rightly or wrongly, you expect those to be those who went to the top art schools, who have access to the best materials, you buy into the narrative that you will be outcompeted for these very large, very prestigious grants by the most privileged, and you will be left with at best a very sporadic, very unstable form of employment. At worst, you get absolutely nothing. And we told you from first, it is specifically this narrative of instability that is so harmful. Not, as they tried to strawman our argument, the general claim that art is poorly paid. Rather, it is the idea that you are going to be left with literally no income in the in-between periods where you are not accessing these very few, very prestigious grants. That is what encourages parents to tell their children, I don't think you should do this, even though you really love it. They said, on their side, they entice people into competing for big grants. We said maybe the people for whom these big grants are worth the risk of long periods with no employment, i.e. those with parents or savings to fund them through. We gave you this response in second, and they dropped this response afterwards. Then they said, well, what if it's not enough for a basic standard of living? We said, well, it's on the info slide, so take it up with the motions committee, not us. But also, this is a very uncomparative claim. Are your grants going to be big enough to fund an entire year's worth of rent until I hopefully win another very exclusive, very prestigious grant? This is the problem with case shifting in third Singapore. You just do not have the analysis to bear it out till the end. But then they say, what if you have no money for paint? We told you this was disingenuous. But crucially, even if you buy that better materials, better cameras, better paintbrushes, whatever, are likely to massively improve the quality of art in their world, at the very least in our world, you are not competing with other people who have access to this for funding. Rather, you are guaranteed this funding either way. Finally, they said, we can fund on need. We said, you're still fighting others. There are still very few grants. But then, note just how they've narrowed the debate by this point to this claim about wasting money. But they're the side that gives funding to those who don't need it, to those who already have prospects, those who already have projects in the work, who could have accessed private funding either way. By contrast, we give money to those in-between projects who needed to tide them over, to need to keep them in the art world producing. Normally at this point I'd clash with their positive case, but they didn't really bring one. But this matters for three reasons. First, because the right to create art should be equal. Second, because the quantity of art matters most because it is so subjective. Finally, because people from lower income backgrounds have things to say with their art, because we don't think it's fair that these people should be cut out and their perspectives ignored. But finally, on diversity of art. By the end of this debate, their claim here has shrunk to the idea that governments are very good at deciding that they're going to fund subversive protest art. We told you this is not true, because there are very few people in these government departments deciding, because they're likely to be the most privileged, because in our world you are guaranteed that funding, so even the most provocative art gets funding, compared to in their world, where it's only a toned-down, watered-down version of what the government thinks diverse art looks like. We're very proud to propose.